Ogg looked down from the mountain, across the valley filled with bad bugs of every shape and size. The normal guardsmen, the little uns, they all got quiet. The prayer men walked down the columns yelling stuff about the Emperor to make everyone brave. Ogg wasn't scared about the bad bugs, but he was worried about using his new gun right. Fletcher told Ogg, Gus, and Biff that they would shoot the biggest bugs that were close by. The rest of the Ogryns would protect the shiny new guns and shoot the little bad bugs. As Ogg marched with Gus and Biff, he noticed that the bugs seemed to get bigger and bigger as the army drew closer and closer. The bad bugs that Ogg thought were the size of the carnifex they faced earlier were much, much larger. Ogg still couldn't tell from this distance if these bad bugs were bigger than the knights that marched with them. The ancient machines swung into battle, stepping over crags and outcrops as if they were nothing. The yellow space marines were in the front, with some guardsmen that had no faces. The ones that always had the mask with the tube. They never talked to Ogg. They were always quiet and serious. Ogg had never seen such a big battle. Seeing the huge numbers of tanks and knights and guards and space marines, Ogg felt like the Emperor's friends were strong. But when he looked over at the horde that blanketed the valley, it wasn't exactly fear he felt. But for the first time in his life, Ogg felt small looking at the massive swarm that seemed to go on forever. Even though there was still a long march to reach the bad bugs, the big booms started. The tanks and knights began to shoot the big guns. Things quickly became too confusing for Ogg to tell what was happening. The Tyranids began to fire back with their own strange big guns. Acid cannons, clouds of boring insects, blasts of bioplasma fired back. Ogg could hear the screams, but Fletcher kept the Ogryns from being distracted. "Eyes forward, lads. The enemies of the Emperor lie before us, not behind." Ogg focused on the wall of enemies moving towards them. Along with the big booms, the guns that went chugga 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 and rat-a-tat-tat started up too. Lines of automatic fire ripped through the rocky plain, sending shards of rock everywhere until they reached the enemy lines. And then the bad bugs were spattered into a fine mist of chitin and ichor. The bad bugs were shooting now too. Some screamed when they were hit. Others tried to stay brave. Ogg never heard the lamenters or the Kriegers scream. The bad bugs never seemed to scream in pain. The battle seemed to fade out as Ogg focused on his job. It took every bit of attention he could muster, but he did not want to fail the Emperor again like he did against the Flying Ones. The Ogryns were tall enough that they could fire their las cannons over the head of the Kriegers. Biff pointed out a towering shape in the line. "That one!" Ogg and the other Ogryns fired their las cannons into a carnifex that tried to reach the front lines. Two of the blasts missed, but one struck it hard. Ogg remembered this kind of bad bug was really tough. But one blast from the las cannon, and one of the beast's scything limbs was disintegrated in the superheated energy beam. A few rockets from heavy weapons teams focused the carnifex. It took a great deal of punishment, but eventually it collapsed. However, that was only the first big bug. More were shoving their way forward. The knights acted as heavy fire support and focused on driving the line back, raking the lines of Tyranids again and again and again. The men and knights were slowly backing up to the mountain where rockier ground provided more cover and could help break up the assault of the Tyranids. The attention of the swarm seemed to be turning on the arriving army. Shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot. Now Ogg could see the power of the Emperor's gun. Whenever the big, bad bugs stepped forward, he, Gus, and Biff focused their fire. It didn't matter how big the bad bugs were, the Emperor's gun blasted them away. It was at this point that Mackay, the ancient and venerable knight, stepped forward with his plasma cannon and chainsword Androcles and began firing blasts into the rank of the enemies with the power of a sun. With the firepower of the ancient knights, the Imperial forces were able to hold back the tide of the advancing Tyranids, tearing through them with shot and shell. As the line held, a dark shadow fell over Ogg and the assembled army. The sound of powerful wing beats filled the air as wind gales threatened to knock the guardsmen from their feet. A Harridan bio-titan had descended with its brood of gargoyles to break the guardsmen. The back lines, with all the firepower they could muster, turned their guns to the skies. Mackay roared his challenge to the Xenos foe.
Face me, beast! I have been the protector of this land long before your kind ever appeared. You will be but one more glory added to my name.
Androcles screamed to life, its blades whirring as Mackay fired his plasma cannon into the belly of the beast as it sent swarms of gargoyles chittering into the ranks of the Imperial forces. The beast let out a roar as it circled around and dove at the venerable knight. Mackay towered over the battlefield, standing 12 meters tall. But he was dwarfed by the great bio-titan that streaked towards him. 30 meters long, with a wingspan that stretched over 40 meters. Mackay braced himself to receive the charge. He swung Androcles, biting deep into the side of the creature and raking along its belly, spilling great gouts of ichor across the battlefield. The tremendous bio-titan plowed into Mackay, knocking the ancient knight from his feet and dragging him through the formations of men behind him. The great beast gave an unearthly keening cry as it tore through Mackay's plasma cannon arm. "Shoot, Ogg! Shoot!"
"Shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot, reload."
Ogg and the other Ogryn fired their las cannons into the bio-titan. Each blast added to the creature's many wounds. Ogg had never seen a living creature that was this huge before. The enormous thing beat its leathery wings, which were now pocked with scorch marks and blast points. It seized Mackay around the waist with its enormous jaws and lifted the powerful machine into the air. There was a sound of squealing, grinding metal as the jaws closed inexorably around the knight. With one defiant cry, Mackay jammed Androcles into the skull of the creature as it circled higher and higher into the air, shaking the knight this way and that like it was a rag doll. Mackay pressed the chain blade deeper and deeper, ripping into the beast's flesh. With one loud snap and crack, Androcles penetrated the great skull of the creature, just as its jaws snapped shut, severing the knight at the waist. The great bio-titan jerked its head away, tearing the sword from the knight's arm. Mackay fell back to Molech like a meteor and crashed into the mountains with a tremendous echoing boom. The Harridan bio-titan slowly spiraled to Earth, its massive bulk smashing into the Tyranid swarm below, with Androcles still embedded in its skull. Ogg did not understand, but he had just watched the death of one of the guardians of Molech that had stood for thousands of years. Thus ended the life of Mackay, Duke of Astara, and most venerable knight of the realm. For him, the struggle was ended, but for the Imperial forces, the battle was only beginning.